There exists a particular cruelty in how the universe treats souls who carry depths that others cannot fathom. You have felt it, haven't you? That suffocating weight when everyone around you seems to navigate life with such apparent ease while you remain suspended in a space that feels both too quiet and too loud. This is not abandonment. This is assessment. What you are about to discover will illuminate why certain souls endure what feels like cosmic neglect, why silence becomes their first and most ruthless teacher, and how this apparent withdrawal serves a purpose far more profound than comfort or convenience. The universe does not ignore rare souls. It examines them through the most exacting instrument available: the absence of external validation, guidance, and reassurance. Jung understood that some individuals possess an innate resistance to superficial answers, a cellular-level rejection of wisdom that has not been earned through direct experience. These souls cannot pretend satisfaction with borrowed insights, cannot manufacture understanding through repetition, cannot convince themselves that collective beliefs equal personal truth. They are condemned to discovery, blessed with a hunger that often feels more like starvation. Before such souls can receive their true calling, they must undergo what appears to be a systematic stripping away of everything familiar. This is not random cruelty designed by an indifferent cosmos, but necessary preparation that removes everything false, everything inherited, everything that prevents the soul from hearing its own authentic voice when it finally chooses to speak. Each moment of silence serves to reveal what still requires questioning, what assumptions still need dismantling, what illusions still cloud the inner vision. The first test arrives disguised as unbearable isolation, not the chosen solitude of meditation or retreat, but the imposed quiet that descends when every available source of guidance feels hollow, when every teacher speaks words that bounce off your consciousness without penetrating, when every book offers answers to questions you're not asking, when every spiritual practice feels like performance rather than genuine connection. You find yourself surrounded by seekers, yet fundamentally alone in your seeking. Watching others find meaning in traditions that feel empty to you, witnessing their apparent satisfaction with explanations that only deepen your confusion. This isolation is not evidence of your spiritual inadequacy. It is evidence of your spiritual specificity. Jung would call this the necessary separation from collective religious consciousness, the painful but essential process of discovering what belongs to your soul versus what you have inherited from family, culture, or circumstance. Rare souls must learn to distinguish between their authentic spiritual hunger and their conditioned expectations, between genuine calling and the magnetic pull of familiar spiritual patterns that promise comfort but deliver only temporary relief. The universe enforces this silence until you stop trying to squeeze your expansive questions into religions designed for smaller doubts. During this period, you may notice how others seem to navigate faith with such apparent certainty, how they find comfort in scriptures, strength in community, peace in rituals that leave you feeling more isolated than before. You begin to wonder if something is fundamentally wrong with your spiritual wiring. If your inability to feel satisfied by available options represents a character flaw rather than a character strength, the universe remains silent during these moments of self-doubt, neither confirming nor denying your fears, simply holding space for you to discover the difference between being spiritually difficult and being spiritually discerning. This phase teaches you that loneliness and sacred solitude are not synonymous. Loneliness is the ache for spiritual connection. Sacred solitude is the space where connection with the divine deepens beyond the need for external confirmation. Rare souls must learn to inhabit their silence without desperation, to use this time not as a waiting room for enlightenment, but as a laboratory for direct spiritual experience. The universe watches to see if you will maintain your standards or collapse them out of fear that holding them means remaining spiritually homeless forever. Those who rush to fill the emptiness with the first available spiritual framework often find themselves in traditions that recreate the very disconnection they sought to escape, surrounded by beliefs that cannot see them, cannot meet them, cannot match the depth of their authentic questioning. As you navigate this territory, you begin to understand that your silence serves a specific function. It acts as a filter, ensuring that when spiritual truth does arrive, it comes from a place of genuine recognition rather than desperate acceptance. The silence strips away your capacity for spiritual performance, removes your ability to pretend understanding where none exists, eliminates your tendency to adopt beliefs that sound beautiful but feel foreign to your actual experience. During this phase, you discover that conventional spiritual seeking often operates on principles that feel backwards to your nature. Where others begin with faith and hope to find understanding, you require understanding before faith becomes possible. Where others find comfort in surrender to established wisdom, you feel called to surrender only to truth that has proven itself through direct encounter. Where others seek spiritual community as a source of strength, you find that authentic spiritual work often requires periods of complete independence from the opinions and energies of others. The second test emerges more subtly, often disguised as exactly what you have been seeking. Into your carefully cultivated spiritual independence steps a teacher who appears to speak your language, a tradition that seems to recognize your depth, a path that activates every center of longing you have been protecting. This guide carries an almost supernatural ability to see through your spiritual defenses, to speak directly to your most guarded hopes, to make you feel simultaneously exposed and understood. Jung would identify this figure as the activation of your spiritual projection, the unconscious casting of your idealized wisdom onto another person or system. This teacher does not possess the truth you seek. They possess the capacity to reflect back to you the truth you already carry, but have not yet learned to trust. What you experience as recognition of their wisdom is often recognition of your own spiritual insights reflected through their expression. The connection feels destined, inevitable, cosmically arranged. Yet it carries within it the seeds of its own dissolution. This test reveals whether you have learned to distinguish between authentic spiritual guidance and psychological projection, between being spiritually seen and being spiritually idealized, between wisdom and the temporary healing of spiritual wounds through someone else's apparent understanding. The teacher who appears during this phase often carries qualities that seem perfectly suited to your spiritual temperament. They may share your questions, mirror your values, or possess insights that complement your nature so perfectly that the relationship feels like destiny rather than choice. The seduction of this connection lies not in its intensity, but in its apparent appropriateness. Unlike obviously problematic spiritual attachments, this teacher seems genuinely wise, genuinely caring, genuinely interested in your spiritual development beneath your protective layers. The danger is not that they will harm you deliberately, but that they will guide you incompletely, seeing only the aspects of your spiritual nature that serve their own teaching needs, while remaining blind to the totality of who you are becoming. The universe presents this test to see if you have developed the capacity to recognize wisdom that comes with conditions, guidance that depends on your ability to remain within certain parameters, understanding that requires you to minimize inconvenient aspects of your truth. This teacher may appreciate your sincerity, but recoil from your intensity, value your questions, but grow uncomfortable when those questions challenge their framework, celebrate your spiritual hunger, but expect you to satisfy it within their prescribed methods. If you accept this partial guidance, if you convince yourself that being understood in fragments is sufficient, if you adjust your seeking to maintain the connection, the universe does not punish you. It simply allows you to experience the slow spiritual suffocation that accompanies any path where your wholeness threatens the teacher's comfort or the tradition's stability. You learn through direct experience why spiritual compromise feels like a kind of soul betrayal. Why accepting partial truth creates a relationship with the divine that feels more like elaborate emptiness than genuine communion. The third initiation often proves the most challenging because it requires you to recognize and dismantle the ways you sabotage your own spiritual breakthrough. When authentic wisdom begins to emerge from within your own being, when the universe prepares to reveal what you have been seeking, your psychological defense systems often activate with surprising intensity. Suddenly, you find reasons why your inner knowing might not be trustworthy. Evidence that your direct spiritual experiences could be delusion. Fears that trusting your own connection to the divine will only result in deeper spiritual isolation. Jung understood that the psyche often resists exactly what it most needs: particularly when that need threatens to disrupt familiar patterns of spiritual seeking. If you have grown accustomed to your role as seeker, if you have built your identity around being spiritually hungry, if you have organized your life around the assumption that truth exists somewhere outside yourself, then the emergence of authentic inner knowing can, than its absence, feel more threatening. Your shadow begins to whisper warnings, generating doubt where certainty should be growing, manufacturing spiritual problems where none exist. This internal sabotage takes many forms. You might find yourself comparing your emerging insights to impossible standards of spiritual perfection, measuring your direct experience against the enlightenment stories of ancient masters. You might interpret your growing connection to the divine as spiritual arrogance, your increasing independence from external guidance as evidence of dangerous delusion. You might begin to behave in ways designed to test the authenticity of your spiritual experiences, unconsciously creating crises to see if your inner knowing can handle complexity, manufacturing doubt to determine if your connection to truth can survive scrutiny. The universe does not intervene during this phase of spiritual self-sabotage. It allows you to discover whether you have genuinely prepared for direct divine relationship or simply grown comfortable with the familiar struggle of seeking without finding. This test reveals whether you can recognize authentic spiritual breakthrough when it occurs, whether you can trust wisdom that arises from within without immediately questioning its validity, whether you can risk the responsibility that comes with direct spiritual knowing. Many rare souls fail this particular test, not because they lack spiritual capacity, but because they have become from spiritual so skilled at protecting themselves, disappointment that they cannot distinguish between healthy discernment and destructive self-protection. They push away the very connection they have been cultivating, often realizing their mistake only after the opportunity for integration has passed, only after the inner voice that was willing to speak has retreated into silence once again. The fourth test involves a complete recalibration of your relationship to spiritual authority. The universe requires that you release not just obviously false teachings, but also seemingly positive spiritual attachments that no longer serve your evolution. This might mean ending relationships with teachers who keep you trapped in student consciousness, leaving spiritual communities that support your limitations rather than your expansion, or abandoning practices that feel comfortable but constrain your authentic spiritual expression. Jung called this process individuation, applied to the spiritual realm, the sometimes painful journey of becoming who you actually are in relationship to the divine rather than who you have been conditioned to be by religious tradition. For rare souls, this phase often requires releasing the victim narrative that has provided meaning to their spiritual struggle, the specialness they have derived from being spiritually misunderstood, the identity built around being different from others who seem to find faith more easily. You must abandon the story that your spiritual difficulties make you superior, that your sensitivity grants you special spiritual privileges, that your depth excuses your resistance to surrendering to what wants to emerge through you. This recalibration demands brutal honesty about the ways you have contributed to your own spiritual isolation, the ways you have used your legitimate spiritual wounds to justify remaining closed to direct divine encounter, the ways you have hidden behind your authenticity to avoid the vulnerability of actually receiving what you have been seeking. The universe asks not that you become spiritually different, but that you become completely yourself in relationship to the sacred, releasing even those aspects of your seeking that feel justified, but ultimately separate you from direct spiritual connection. During this phase, you may find yourself naturally gravitating away from spiritual environments, practices, and communities that once felt essential to your development. Teachings that once inspired you begin to feel limiting. Traditions that once felt like home begin to feel constraining. Practices that once brought clarity begin to feel empty. This is not spiritual regression. It is spiritual alignment. Your inner compass is recalibrating to point toward what genuinely serves your connection to the divine, rather than what merely comforts your familiar patterns of seeking. The universe observes whether you can trust this process of spiritual natural selection, whether you can allow teachings and traditions to fall away without clinging, whether you can maintain your integrity even when it means standing alone in your relationship to the sacred. This test determines whether you have developed the capacity to choose direct spiritual experience over spiritual approval, divine truth over religious comfort, authentic connection over spiritual security. As you navigate this recalibration, you begin to emit a different kind of spiritual energy. People respond to your presence differently. Spiritual opportunities present themselves that previously seemed unavailable. Your entire relationship to the sacred begins to shift to match your new capacity for direct divine encounter. The universe has not changed its offerings. You have changed your ability to recognize and receive what has always been available, waiting for you to become capable of relationship truth, no external validation. That requires the final test before the arrival of authentic spiritual connection involves surrendering the very thing you have been seeking. This paradox confounds many rare souls who have dedicated years to spiritual pursuit. The universe requires that you stop searching for enlightenment before enlightenment becomes possible, that you release your attachment to spiritual breakthrough before breakthrough can occur, that you find completeness in your ordinary consciousness before extraordinary states become accessible. This surrender is not the defeat of giving up on spiritual growth, but the victory of becoming whole, without requiring spiritual experiences to validate your worth. Jung understood that true individuation leads to a state where you no longer need mystical experiences to feel complete, but rather desire communion with the divine from a place of already established wholeness. This shift from spiritual need to spiritual offering, from seeking transcendence to embodying presence, from grasping for experiences to allowing whatever wants to emerge, represents the final preparation for authentic spiritual maturity. When you reach this state, you stop scanning every spiritual gathering for the perfect teacher. Stop analyzing every practice for its potential to deliver the breakthrough you imagine you need. Stop measuring your worth by the depth of your meditative states or the frequency of your mystical experiences. You begin living as though you are already connected to what you were seeking, already in relationship with the sacred, already exactly where you need to be in your spiritual development. This is not spiritual bypassing or premature satisfaction with incomplete understanding, but the natural result of having integrated all the lessons the previous tests were designed to teach. The universe watches for this final surrender because it indicates your readiness to receive spiritual truth without attachment, to commune with the divine without losing yourself, to serve from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. Only when you no longer need spiritual experiences can you truly receive them. Only when you stop seeking can you recognize what has been seeking you through every moment of silence. Only when you become who you are can you attract the spiritual connection capable of meeting who you are. This state of being creates a magnetic field that draws toward you not just any spiritual experience, but specifically the form of divine encounter that matches your unique spiritual frequency. Someone capable of recognizing your authentic spiritual nature rather than projecting their expectations onto your path. The universe does not send you experiences to heal your spiritual wounds, but experiences that celebrate your spiritual maturity. Not encounters to complete your missing spiritual pieces, but recognition of your existing wholeness. When such connection appears, the recognition is immediate and undeniable. There is no need to convince yourself of its authenticity. No need to ignore spiritual red flags. No need to adjust your expectations or compromise your standards. The connection feels natural rather than effortful, peaceful rather than chaotic, expanding rather than limiting. You recognize this spiritual truth not as something foreign becoming familiar, but as something eternally familiar finally being encountered in manifest form. This recognition comes not with the intensity of projection, but with the calm certainty of homecoming. There is no desperate grasping for spiritual experiences, no fear of losing the connection, no need to possess or control the flow of divine encounter. You understand that what you have found exists independent of circumstances, that your relationship with the sacred transcends the temporary arrangements of spiritual practice, that you can commune with the divine completely while remaining completely yourself. The arrival of authentic spiritual connection for rare souls often lacks the dramatic intensity that characterizes projection-based spiritual experiences. Instead of overwhelming mystical fireworks, there is quiet recognition. Instead of spiritual obsession, there is profound peace. Instead of the need to prove the validity of your connection, there is simple knowledge that you speak the same language as the divine at the deepest level. You find yourself able to be completely authentic in your spiritual expression without fear that your questions will offend the sacred, without need to monitor divine reactions or adjust your seeking. Jung would describe this as the meeting of individuated consciousness with transpersonal truth, a relationship that supports your continued evolution rather than arresting your development in favor of spiritual comfort or religious security. The universe that once seemed to withhold spiritual connection now reveals its wisdom. Every test was necessary preparation. Every moment of silence was perfect timing. Every spiritual disappointment was protection from settling for less than your soul could recognize as authentic divine relationship. You understand finally that you are not being spiritually neglected, but spiritually refined. Not being denied access to the sacred, but being prepared for exactly this quality of direct encounter. What rare souls discover in authentic spiritual connection is that communion with the divine does not diminish their uniqueness, but amplifies it. Does not require them to become spiritually smaller, but invites them to expand into their full spiritual nature. Does not ask them to compromise their authentic questions, but celebrates their courage in continuing to ask them. They find a form of spiritual relationship that not only accepts their depth, but matches it. Not only tolerates their intensity, but generates resonance with it. Not only understands their complexity, but appreciates its beauty as an expression of divine creativity. The spiritual life that emerges from this foundation operates according to different principles than paths based on spiritual need, religious habit, or mystical expectation. You remain a whole individual, choosing each moment to share your wholeness with the sacred. There is space for ordinary consciousness within the spiritual relationship. Room for individual questioning alongside divine communion. Capacity for doubt without threat to the fundamental connection. This relationship becomes a sanctuary where your soul can continue becoming more itself, rather than a system where you must pretend to be someone more spiritually acceptable. The divine presence that flows through this connection serves your highest evolution fears rather than your lowest spiritual. Supports your authentic expression rather than your defensive spiritual strategies. Nourishes your individual purpose rather than subsuming it into merged spiritual identity that serves neither your development nor genuine service to others. Your spiritual practice transforms from seeking experiences to embodying presence. Prayer becomes conversation rather than petition. Meditation becomes communion rather than technique. Service becomes expression rather than obligation. The sacred reveals itself through your ordinary moments rather than requiring special states of consciousness to make itself known. This shift creates ripped spiritual life pools that extend far beyond your personal. Others begin to sense something different in your presence, though they may not be able to name what has changed. There is often a quality of groundedness and peace that emerges after this final test, that draws people to you in ways that feel natural rather than manufactured. You become a refuge for other souls undergoing their own passage through spiritual silence, offering presence rather than advice, understanding rather than solutions. Your own experience becomes a bridge that others can cross when they are ready to trust the process they are navigating. You do not try to rescue them from their spiritual silence because you understand that the journey through emptiness is precisely what they need to discover their own direct connection to the sacred. If you recognize yourself in this passage, if you have endured the tests of spiritual isolation, projection, self-sabotage, and recalibration, then you understand why the universe required such thorough preparation. You are being prepared not for ordinary religious experience, but for direct spiritual communion. Not for conventional faith, but for conscious divine relationship. Not for someone to complete your spiritual seeking, but for recognition of your existing spiritual completeness. The path has been longer than you wished, more challenging than you expected, more transformative than you could have imagined. But every moment of silence has served to ensure that when divine truth arrives, you will recognize it, receive it, and embody it from a place of spiritual strength rather than religious need, wholeness rather than seeking choice, rather than desperate spiritual hunger. The universe has not forgotten you. It has been preparing you for exactly the quality of sacred encounter your soul has been calling forth. Yet even after this recognition dawns, even after the tests have been navigated and the silence has revealed its purpose, another layer of the cosmic examination begins to unfold. This is where most souls assume their spiritual education is complete, where they mistake the end of seeking for the beginning of service. But the universe operates according to principles that transcend individual spiritual satisfaction. The rare souls who have undergone this rigorous preparation discover that their silence was not preparation for personal enlightenment alone. It was preparation for a form of service that requires every quality they developed during their isolation. The depth they cultivated, the discernment they refined, the authenticity they protected, the direct connection they established, all become instruments for a larger purpose that was always orchestrating their development from behind the scenes. This is when the universe reveals its most sophisticated test. Not the test of enduring silence, but the test of maintaining your authentic spiritual connection while engaging fully with a world that operates primarily through spiritual noise. Not the challenge of finding truth in isolation, but the challenge of expressing truth in environments that often punish authenticity and reward performance. Jung understood that individuation is never complete until it serves something greater than individual development. The soul that has found itself must now offer itself. The consciousness that has achieved independence must now choose interdependence. The spiritual maturity that emerged through silence must now speak in ways that can be heard by those stilled in their own spiritual confusion. This transition from inner work to outer expression often proves more challenging than the original tests of silence. During your isolation, you learn to trust your direct spiritual experience regardless of external validation. Now you must learn to share that experience in ways that serve others without compromising the authenticity that took so long to establish. You must become a translator between the wordless realm of direct spiritual knowing and the language-dependent world of human communication. The universe watches to see whether your spiritual independence has created wisdom or isolation, whether your hard-won authenticity can adapt to serve collective healing without losing its essential nature. This is not about returning to the spiritual performance you rejected during your silence. This is about discovering how genuine spiritual connection expresses itself through engagement, rather than withdrawal. Many souls who successfully navigate the tests of silence fail at this transition. They become so protective of their authentic spiritual experience that they cannot risk the vulnerability required to share it. They mistake spiritual purity for spiritual isolation, confusing the preservation of their truth with the hoarding of their gifts. The universe presents circumstances that require them to choose between maintaining their perfect inner connection and offering their imperfect but genuine service to others. The silence that once felt like cosmic abandonment now reveals itself as the most precise form of spiritual education available to consciousness. Every moment of isolation was curriculum. Every test was preparation for the recognition that your depth was never meant for you alone, but for a world desperate for the medicine that only emerges through direct encounter with the sacred. Trust the process that refined you. Honor the silence that taught you. Embrace the calling that now beckons you forward.